When we look at the legacy of the American West, there's this really glaring contradiction right at the center of it.
Oh, absolutely. It's pretty massive when you actually dig into it.
Right, because if you ask almost anyone, around the world about Jesse James, you get this incredibly romanticized image. You picture this rugged Robin Hood on horseback.
Yeah, the classic noble outlaw.
Exactly, the guy who stole from the wealthy Northern Railroad barons just to give the money back to the poor, downtrodden farmers. And, I mean, it's a really compelling story.
It's a great story, but the historical sources reveal a reality that is completely different.
Completely. I mean, we are looking at a brutal, politically motivated guerrilla fighter.
Yeah.
And a thief who kept absolutely all the loot for himself and his gang.
Yeah, the gap between the myth and the man is just staggering. We naturally prefer this comfortable legend of economic justice, but the historical record shows us a landscape of extreme violence, partisan vengeance, and, well, frankly, localized terrorism.
So we have taken the massive stack of historical sources, all the articles, and the personal notes you shared with us to basically peel back the dime novel mythology of Jesse James.
Which is much needed, trust me.
Yeah, so today's mission for you listening is to explore the real story. We are doing a deep dive into a story-driven biography of a teenage guerrilla fighter who somehow became America's most notorious outlaw.
And maybe more importantly, we're looking at the brilliant, calculated PR machinery that manipulated the public into loving him.
Right, the PR spin is wild. It's exactly like watching a modern movie that claims it's, based on a true story.
Oh yeah, where they change all the facts.
Exactly. The real events are heavily sanitized, all the rough edges are sanded down, and the actual villain of the story is rewritten as this misunderstood anti-hero just so the audience has someone to root for.
Only in this case, that script was being written while he was still out there committing armed robberies.
Which is just crazy to think about. But to understand how he became that outlaw and why that sanitized script was so easily accepted, we first have to understand the mechanics of the violent world that shattered his childhood.
Right. You can't understand Jesse James without understanding Missouri in the mid-19th century.
Specifically, this area in Clay County known as Little Dixie. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So Jesse Woodson James was born there in 1847 into a family that was relatively wealthy and deeply embedded in a very specific economic system.
And the nickname Little Dixie really hints at what that system was.
It does. It's crucial context. This part of Missouri was heavily settled by migrants from the Upper South, so places like Kentucky and Tennessee.
Okay.
And they brought their culture, their cash crops, and crucially, their slaves with them. While enslaved people made up about 10% of Missouri's overall population, in Clay County, they were 25%.
Wow, so a huge concentration.
Yeah, and Jesse's family was very much a part of this structure. His family owned over 100 acres, and his mother, Zerelda, and his stepfather, Dr. Reuben Samuel, owned 7 slaves to work their tobacco farm.
Okay, so Jesse grows up in a slaveholding family in a state that is essentially a cultural powder keg. Because Missouri was a border state, right?
Right. A bizarre, highly volatile mix of northern and southern ideologies crammed into one geographic area.
And the match that lights that powder keg is the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854.
That legislation is basically the catalyst for everything that follows.
Right, because it allowed the territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery.
Exactly. It functioned as this demographic race.
Yeah.
It created a perverse incentive where Missouri locals flooded across the border into Kansas to physically force it to become a slave state.
And abolitionists are rushing in from the other side to stop them.
Yes. So it inherently caused violence. I mean, it was a localized civil war before the actual American Civil War even officially started.
So when the actual Civil War does break out in 1861, Missouri just descends into total chaos.
Utter chaos. It's not just 2 standing armies lining up on a battlefield in neat uniforms.
No, it's much more personal than that.
It's extremely intimate, neighbor-on-neighbor, guerrilla warfare. You have secessionist bushwhackers fighting Union militias known as Jayhawkers.
And the sheer intimacy of that violence is what defines this whole period. Because these weren't anonymous soldiers.
No, these were people who knew each other's families. They knew where everyone lived.
Right. And the James family sided with the Confederacy. Jesse's older brother, Frank, actually joined the secessionist militias really early on.
He did. And because of that affiliation, Union militias targeted the family farm. They were looking for Frank's guerrilla squad.
And when they didn't find him, they went after the family.
Yeah, they found Jesse's stepfather, Reuben Samuel, and they tortured him. They literally briefly hung him from a tree.
Jesus.
Yeah. And according to the historical accounts, they also lashed a young Jesse.
Wait, I just want to clarify the timeline here. He's a young teenager when his farm is raided and his stepfather is tortured right in front of him.
Yeah, he's barely a teenager.
And then at 16 years old, he joins up with his brother.
Yeah.
But they aren't joining the regular Confederate army.
Right,
really.
oh no. They are joining notorious bushwhacker units led by men like William Quantrill and William Bloody Bill Anderson.
And the sources describe these groups, executing prisoners, murdering civilians, scalping the dead. So my question is he even functionally an adult at this point? Or just a deeply traumatized kid with a gun? Like, how do the sources treat him here?
Well, the sources paint a picture of someone operating entirely outside normal adolescent development. I mean, from age 16 to 18, his brain was developing in a crucible of total lawless violence.
Where murder is just everyday life.
Worse than that, it wasn't just normalized, it was rewarded and celebrated by his peers.
Wow.
Yeah. The most infamous event Jesse participated in was the Centralia Massacre.
Oh, I read about this. It's horrific.
It really is. Guerrillas stopped a train carrying unarmed Union soldiers who were just heading home on leave, and they executed and mutilated over 20 of them.
Unarmed soldiers.
Unarmed. And then right after that, they ambushed a pursuing Union regiment and killed every single one who tried to surrender.
God. So by the time Jesse is 18, he's participated in literal massacres.
Yeah, and he has been shot in the chest twice, wounds that very nearly killed him.
So given that level of early exposure to just extreme brutality, his criminal career almost feels like a logical continuation of the only life he had ever really known as a young adult.
Exactly. When the Civil War officially ends, the standing armies surrender. But for teenagers like Jesse James, the psychological conditioning was permanent.
The war didn't just turn off for him.
No, peace in Missouri brought absolutely no peace. The violence simply mutated, and it was heavily fueled by deep political disenfranchisement.
Because after the war, Missouri's government is taken over by a Republican-dominated Reconstruction legislature, right?
Right. And they passed a new constitution that freed the state's slaves, which was obviously necessary, but they went much further to punish their political enemies.
How so?
They barred anyone who had supported the Confederacy from voting, from serving on juries, or even from holding public office.
So, try to imagine coming home from a brutal war you lost, and the new government strips you of your basic civic rights.
Yeah, you have a massive population of former Confederates who suddenly have zero political voice and zero power.
And into that totally volatile atmosphere step the remnants of the guerrilla fighters.
Precisely. And in 1866, we see the first daylight, peacetime armed bank robbery in U.S. history.
This was in Liberty, Missouri.
Yeah. And the target wasn't random at all. It was a bank owned by former Republican militia officers.
Now, I know there is some debate about whether Jesse was actually there.
Right. The historical debate centers on whether Jesse James was actually at that Liberty Bank robbery, mostly because he may have still been bedridden recovering from those severe chest wounds.
But whether he was there or not, that robbery set the mechanical template for what was to come.
Exactly. These former bushwhackers were actively targeting the financial institutions run by their political enemies.
Okay, so Jesse undeniably steps into the spotlight a few years later, December 1869, the robbery of a bank in Gallatin, Missouri.
Yes, this is the big turning point. This is the moment Jesse James officially becomes an outlaw in the eyes of the public.
Because inside the bank, Jesse shot and killed a cashier, a man named John Sheets.
Right, and Jesse later claimed he'd do it because he mistakenly believed the cashier was Samuel P. Cox.
And Cox was the Union officer who had ambushed and killed his former commander, Bloody Bill Anderson, during the war.
Exactly. So that assassination attempt, it barely netted any money, but it generated immense publicity.
Because Jesse and Frank made this daring escape on horseback right through the middle of a posse.
Yeah, it was very dramatic. The governor put a reward on his head, and Jesse used that attention to claim he was a victim of Northern oppression, taking, justifiable revenge.
But I have to push back on that narrative a bit. Based on the sources, was he genuinely trying to avenge his fallen Civil War commander? Or was that just a highly convenient political excuse to justify what was essentially an armed robbery and a cold-blooded murder?
And that right there is the pivotal debate among historians analyzing his motives. Was it targeted political terrorism or a botched robbery that he brilliantly spun after the fact?
Right.
The answer likely leans toward the latter because of what happened next. I mean, a daring escape gets you in the local paper, sure, but it takes a very specific strategic alliance to turn a local killer into a national folk hero.
And that alliance is with John Newman Edwards.
Yes.
Who wasn't just a journalist. I mean, reading about him, he was basically a 19th century crisis PR manager.
That is the perfect way to describe him. He was a newspaper editor and a former Confederate cavalryman.
And his ultimate goal was to return former secessionists to political power in Missouri.
Right. So when he looked at Jesse James, he didn't just see a bank robber. He saw a powerful political symbol.
So Edwards essentially becomes Jesse's publicist.
Basically, yeah. He starts publishing letters written by Jesse. And in these letters, Jesse does this brilliant rhetorical dance.
He plays both sides.
Exactly. He claims he's entirely innocent of the robberies, but at the exact same time, he expresses immense pride in his Confederate loyalties and fiercely denounces the Republican Reconstruction politics.
And Edwards would publish these letters alongside his own glowing editorials.
Yeah, painting Jesse as a noble resistor standing up against an oppressive, centralized federal government.
Meanwhile, back in reality, Jesse and Frank formed the James Younger gang with other former Confederates.
And they massively expand their operations. They're robbing banks, stagecoaches, and eventually trains all across the Midwest.
And they made sure the robberies had a political flavor to match Edwards' editorials.
Very deliberately.
Like in 1873, they robbed a train in Adair, Iowa. They stole money, obviously. But the crucial detail here is that they wore Ku Klux Klan masks while doing it.
Yeah, that detail is jarring.
And just a quick note for you listening. Obviously, we are just impartially conveying what the historical sources say here. We aren't endorsing any of this. But the sources make it explicitly clear this was a direct, terrifying political statement against federal centralization and Reconstruction policies.
Absolutely. It was a message. And that detail entirely shatters the Robin Hood narrative Edwards was actively crafting.
Right, because Edwards was writing that Jesse only robbed the rich railroad monopolies to help the poor farmers.
But the sources are explicit on this point. There is absolutely zero evidence that the James Younger gang ever shared a single dime of their loot with anyone outside their own personal circle.
None.
At all. None. It was entirely self-serving.
The PR spin is just fascinating. You have a client committing federal crimes, violent robberies, and you spin it into a narrative of localized political resistance.
Because he gave the public a story they desperately wanted to hear. They wanted to believe this wasn't about greed, that it was about standing up to institutional power.
And it worked. The public started to view the gang incredibly sympathetically.
The corporations they were robbing, however, had immense power and absolutely no sympathy.
No, they wanted them stopped.
Right. The gang's theatrical, high-profile robberies forced the Adams Express Company to hire the famous Pinkerton National Detective Agency to hunt the gang down.
Now, this seems fundamentally flawed to me. Pinkertons were used to infiltrating urban immigrant rings or breaking union strikes in big cities where people didn't know each other for generations.
Yes.
Dropping them into rural Missouri to catch the James brothers. How did an urban detective agency expect to operate in a tight-knit community where everyone shared the trauma of the Civil War?
Well, they couldn't. The mechanics of their failure were totally inevitable. The Pinkertons were completely out of their element.
They must have stuck out like a sore thumb.
Oh, instantly. The gang had an incredibly deep, loyal network of support among the local ex-Confederates. A detective in a suit with a strange accent in Little Dixie. They knew immediately. Yeah. They sent agents in undercover, and those agents ended up dead. Joseph Witcher was found killed after trying to infiltrate the area. Another agent, Louis Lull, was killed in a gunfight with the Younger brothers.
So Alan Pinkerton, the head of the agency, he takes this personally, right?
Very personally. It becomes a blood feud for him. So in January 1875, he stages a night raid on the James family homestead.
This part is so intense.
It really is. The detectives surround the house and they throw an incendiary device, basically a bomb, through the window.
A bomb into a house where they know the mother is sleeping.
Yes. And the explosion is horrific. It kills Jesse's 9-year-old half-brother, Archie, and it severely maims his mother, Zerelda, literally blowing off one of her arms.
The fallout from this must have been seismic.
It was. Pinkerton claimed later they only meant to burn the house down, not kill anyone, but the public outrage was massive.
I mean, even people who didn't support the gang had to be horrified that a private corporate army had murdered a child and maimed a woman in her own home.
Exactly. It was a monumental disaster for law enforcement. The Missouri legislature actually introduced a bill that would have praised the James and younger brothers and offered them full amnesty.
Full amnesty
Falling.
for violent robberies.
Yeah. It was narrowly defeated, but the fact that it was even introduced shows the incredible level of sympathy they had acquired.
Because by acting so recklessly and violently, the Pinkertons inadvertently validated the exact narrative John Newman Edwards had been selling for years.
That is the ultimate irony. Heavy-handed institutional power almost always accidentally legitimizes the rebellion it's trying to crush. They proved, in the eyes of the public, that the James family really were victims of oppressive, violent outside forces.
It cemented the myth permanently.
It did. But, surviving the Pinkertons and having the protection of all these local sympathizers, it went to their heads. They got dangerously overconfident.
Right, because stepping outside of that protective bubble changes everything, which is exactly what happens in September 1876.
The famous Northfield disaster.
Yeah. So the James Younger gang decides to travel far outside their usual territory, all the way up to Northfield, Minnesota.
Which is a huge geographic jump.
Why did they go all the way up there?
Well, they targeted the First National Bank there because they believed it was connected to Adelbert Ames, who was a prominent Republican politician and a former Reconstruction governor.
So they were attempting to blend robbery with perceived political retribution again.
Exactly. But the mechanics of losing that hometown shield proved absolutely catastrophic.
Because inside the bank, the acting cashier, Joseph Lee Haywood, he simply refuses to open the safe.
Right. They held a Bowie knife to his throat, they cracked his skull with a pistol butt, and he still refused.
And outside, the environment was completely different from Missouri.
Entirely. In Missouri, bystanders usually stayed out of the way out of fear or, hidden sympathy. But in Minnesota, these were just armed strangers attacking the town's wealth.
So the townspeople fought back.
Yeah. They realized what was happening, ran to the local hardware stores, grabbed rifles, and engaged the gang in a massive street shootout from protected positions.
They just laid siege to them.
Yeah, they shot 2 of the bandits dead right there in the street and wounded several others.
But as the gang realizes they are trapped and they flee, on the way out the door, one of the outlaws turns and shoots the unarmed, bleeding cashier, Haywood, in the head.
It was a brutal, completely senseless murder.
And a massive manhunt follows. The gang splits up.
Right. The younger brothers are eventually hunted down, they're shot to pieces, and captured. Out of the whole crew, only Jesse and Frank James managed to escape back to the safety of Missouri.
So the James Younger gang is effectively destroyed in one afternoon. Did they fail simply because they left Missouri? Like, without that hometown shield, were they just ordinary criminals out of their depth?
Absolutely. When they stepped outside of Little Dixie into a community that had no sympathy for their political grievances and no fear of their reputation, their tactics entirely crumbled. They were exposed not as noble guerrillas, but as common thugs.
And that massive personnel loss forces Jesse into a very dangerous corner. By 1879, Frank has mostly settled down, but Jesse is restless.
He misses the thrill, the money. He can't stop.
So he is forced to recruit a new gang to replace his battle-hardened loyalists. How does that shift in personnel fundamentally break his operations?
Well, these new recruits were not the ideologically aligned guerrilla comrades he rode with in the 1860s. They were just common street criminals.
They're just in it for a quick buck.
Exactly. They lacked that deep-seated, blood-bound loyalty that defined the original gang. And because of this, Jesse grows incredibly paranoid. He starts suspecting his own men of betrayal.
I mean, rightfully so, as it turns out.
Oh, very much so.
By 1881, he's hiding in plain sight in St. Joseph, Missouri, using the alias Thomas Howard.
And his paranoia is so extreme, he only trusts 2 new recruits. The brothers Robert and Charlie Ford.
He actually asks them to move into his house with his wife and children to act as bodyguards.
Yeah, keep your friends close, right? But behind the scenes, the political machinery was closing in. Missouri had a new governor, Thomas T. Crittenden, who was absolutely determined to end the Jesse James saga.
But the law prevented him from offering a massive state reward.
It did. So he secretly conspired with the railroad and express corporations to put up a $10,000 bounty for the James brothers.
$10,000 was a fortune back then.
Huge money. And Robert Ford, the man sleeping under Jesse's roof, was secretly negotiating with the governor to collect that bounty.
Wow. So the tension comes to a head on April 3, 1882. It's a warm morning. They've just finished breakfast. Jesse reads the morning newspaper and sees that another gang member has confessed to a murder.
And he immediately gets suspicious.
Because he knows the Fords knew about this and didn't tell him. The tension in the living room is just thick.
Robert Ford actually said later he thought Jesse knew he was there to betray him in that moment.
But then Jesse does something completely baffling.
Yeah, in a strangely uncharacteristic move, he takes off his gun belt, he tosses his revolvers onto the sofa, completely disarming himself.
Which he never done.
Never. He turns his back on the Ford brothers, steps up onto a chair, and begins dusting a picture hanging on the wall.
It is unbelievable irony. Here's a man who survived brutal hand-to-hand Civil War combat, who survived multiple gunshots to the chest, who outran massive posses, who survived Pinkerton firebombs.
Yep.
And he is killed in his own living room while doing a household chore.
Because right then, Robert Ford draws his gun and shoots the unarmed Jesse James in the back of the head.
Unbelievable.
The aftermath was a synchronized political circus. The Ford brothers immediately surrendered and wired the governor for their reward.
And how did they know for sure it was him?
The body was officially identified by the old Civil War chest wounds and a missing middle finger. But the legal mechanics that followed shocked the public.
Right, because of the timeline.
In a single day, the Fords were indicted for murder, pleaded guilty, were sentenced to hang, and then were granted a full pardon by Governor Crittenden.
A single day. It was so blatantly orchestrated. The governor basically hired an assassin using corporate money and pushed the paperwork through in 24 hours.
Yeah. And while many were relieved the outlaw was dead, the cowardly nature of the killings sparked a massive wave of sympathy.
And Jesse's mother, Zerelda, she cemented this martyr narrative, didn't she?
She sure did. She wrote a bitter epitaph for his gravestone that read, "In loving memory of my beloved son, murdered by a traitor and coward whose name is not worthy to appear here."
Wow. And almost immediately the rumor started that he wasn't really dead.
Oh, of course. The myth was so powerful, people literally refused to believe he could die like a normal person. For decades, people claimed he had survived.
I read that in 1948, a 101-year-old man named J. Frank Dalton even came forward claiming to be Jesse James.
Yeah, that happened. But it wasn't until 1995, when scientists exhumed the grave in Kearney, Missouri, and conducted DNA testing, that they definitively proved the body really belonged to Jesse.
The historical record is just remarkably clear. We are looking at a violent partisan fighter, a murderer, and a thief who terrorized the Midwest for a decade and a half.
Yet pop culture continues to romanticize him.
Which brings up such an interesting thought to leave you with today. Why do we, as a society, so desperately want to believe in the noble outlaw? Why is it so comforting to take a brutal, self-serving criminal and project our own desires for justice and rebellion onto him?
It's a powerful human impulse.
It really is. Jesse James is frozen in time as this Robin Hood figure, despite all the evidence to the contrary. So it really makes you wonder, who are the figures we are mythologizing today? What modern figures are we currently writing sanitized movie scripts for in our heads, ignoring the uncomfortable facts just because we prefer a better story, something to mull over? Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the real Jesse James.
It's been great.
We hope you enjoyed peeling back the layers of the legend, and we warmly invite you back for your next personalized exploration.